And that's something that people kind of get frustrated with architecture sometimes, because they get a no, and they get another no, and they get another no. So what we do sometimes is I tell the young designers, I want you to design something that you think I would like, and then something that you think we think the client would like. And then once you get that done, you get to do whatever you want.
Right.
And we call that like Scheme X. And sometimes Scheme X is the one that just out of freakish chance, the client loves.
John, thank you very much. We've got John Marx from Form4 Architecture in San Francisco is willing to sit down with us and kind of share his time. John, thank you so much. Really appreciate you doing it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, if we just jump right in, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background and a little bit about your firm?
Yeah, so I was born in the Midwest back in the late 50s in a small town, which was a university town. I went to the University of Illinois, state school, and then kind of escaped to San Francisco in 1981 and fell in love with the city and then never wanted to leave. So it's been an interesting journey. I worked for a variety of different firms of different sizes. I've worked for big firms like HOK and KMD. I worked for small firms in Tiburon, which was like Warren Callister. I've worked on the peninsula, so you kind of go around. Probably the reality was every 3 or 4 years, I'd end up changing firms at the beginning. But then in 1999, we founded Form4, and it's been 22 years, 1998, actually, I believe. And it's been 22 years then in one place. And it's been an adventure. It's had its high points. It's had its low points. We've been through many recession cycles and expansion cycles, and it's an interesting dynamic. And so now I'm the Chief Artistic Officer, which is a little unusual title for an architecture firm.
Right.
But we're advocating for we're advocating for emotional meaning and in architecture, and to try to create buildings that people can love again. So we are a little critical of modernism to date and its disconnection to society. So from the standpoint of getting people interested in going into architecture, I think that more and more people are saying, we want to make more lovable buildings. And so if one of the reasons you were unsure was you were unsure whether or not the profession was going to respond, I think that a lot of people are reaching out and saying, we need to do a better job. And to get people to design from their heart as well as from their mind, because it's both of those things in balance.
Right, 100%.
So that's kind of where we are. We changed to a little bit of an advocacy position in the office, and we start our new vision statement with the term, in order to return a sense of humanity to architecture. So you can see where we're going.
Yep.
Anyway, so that's, I think, the background. Now we're about 40 people.
Okay.
The ghost of an office is in downtown San Francisco on 2nd and Mission. Nobody's there. We're all working at home. And I think relatively happily working at home. There's a few people, maybe 5 or 6, that would really like to get back to the office, but everybody else actually is voting to, like, let's keep this going, or at least keep it flexible.
Right, right. That's what,
and of course,
I think.
COVID gave us, oh.
No, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, COVID gave us the opportunity to experiment with the notion of working at home, which we wouldn't dare have done otherwise. We'd be too worried that people wouldn't be effective and efficient.
Right.
Turns out, I know I'm working harder than I ever have.
Right. I'm hearing that across the board. And I think that was even outside of design, right? That was kind of the fear was, yeah. We understand that, especially in the Bay Area where we've got cost of living issues and things like that to factor in, the idea of having a team member that was away, it always, I mean, we talk about culture and things like that, like how do you build that, but also will they be effective? And COVID kind of forced us.
Interestingly enough, we have a fellow from Australia that's working for the office now. and a couple people that are working out of Mexico.
Okay.
And you know, they don't want to move right now to the Bay Area because things are, you know, up in the air and it's difficult to do a move during COVID. But they're employees now, and they're working away, and they're very effective.
That's
Because
awesome.
the tools are great. I mean, 10 years ago, this would have been very difficult, and 20 years ago, impossible.
Hmm.
You know, you'd be FedExing drawings. It would just be a nightmare. But
Right.
it's actually pretty sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we are lucky in that sense, right? With the capabilities that we have to be able to kind of, like, I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine, 20 years ago being in a global pandemic, like, what would you do all day? Just.
Oh yeah, no, it would. Well, we'd hopefully all be writing poetry and.
Right. Playing a lot of chess. I just watched Queen's Gambit on Netflix. So
Oh yeah, there you go.
I'd be playing a lot of chess on a chessboard. So
Yeah.
awesome. Could you tell me just a little bit about why you wanted to become an architect? And maybe I hear a lot of there was a moment that I can point back to
Oh
that
yeah.
I knew.
I was 7 years old.
Okay, love it.
I was 7 years old. So it was one of those, it's unlike my daughter who did this with her career. You know, mine is a straight line.
Okay.
But the thing was, before, when I was 6, before I wanted to become an architect, I wanted to be an artist. You know, I wanted to be a painter. That was my real life goal, passion kind of a thing. And but I grew up in the Midwest, and there the notion of being an artist is not considered an acceptable kind of thing to do with your life. It's like, okay, well, you could do that on weekends, but you need a real job. So I had this, it wasn't that my parents said that, but that was the environment that I lived in. And when I was in school, and whatever grade you were in when you were 7 years old, they had a little thing on, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, it's a fireman, a doctor, this, that, and the other thing. And they were going through those things, and I was thinking, I want to be an artist. And they didn't have artist in there. But what they did have was they had engineer. And I was thinking, oh, this is kind of interesting. You got to build things. I like to build things. I said, but it's not quite there. And then they went to architect, and they said, you're creative. You're sort of like an artist. And I was like, yes. And I thought, okay, that's for me. So straight line. Now, I didn't really know really what it meant, other than you design buildings, you do, you know, buildings. It wasn't until I actually went to college that I truly understood. They didn't have programs like this.
Mm-hmm.
They had drafting in high school, which I didn't take, actually. I took art classes. I didn't take the drafting classes. But I did discover later what it really meant to be an architect. And then I knew that it was a good combination of my skills. My father was an economics professor, so I always had a science and math comfort, but I was also an artist. You know, I've always painted all my life and wrote poetry and things like that. So now I can get paid to sort of.
I love it. That's a great story. Is there anything particular about your job that you love the most, or kind of what is your favorite thing of your day-to-day activity of being an architect?
Well, the one thing to remember, it is a job. We have clients. It goes up and down. But I would say the broadest thing is for me, is that I can use my talents to make the world a better place. Mm. And that goes to, you want to do the thing you love. And so, you know, I'm 62. I want to do this until I'm 92 or 102. We'll see. You know, health is always the thing that can stand in your way. But it's the kind of thing is, you know, it's just something that I love.
Right.
I'm fortunate because I get to be the artistic officer. So I get to, in theory, have the most fun. But it can also be the most challenging when you're making compromises, which is the nature of architecture. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of people, it's a lot of things, and you have to navigate that. And I used to tell people that as the design director, that was my job, was navigating compromise.
Right.
But
right.
That's how you things built. And you know, that's just part of what you do. Right. So if you want to do the pure version, you just become a poet. but the thing is, the trade-off is when it works, it's amazing. You know, when you build something You've got all these hundreds of people that are all involved in it. And when you can actually create something wonderful, it is truly amazing.
That's awesome. So you touched on a couple points there that I've heard themes over and over again as we talk to people like you, which was the ability to kind of hit your stride in design in your 50s, 60s, right? I mean, this is an endeavor.
Yeah.
This is a long-term play. And it's not something, it's the exact opposite of being like a professional athlete where you have a finite amount of time to make this work. By the time you're in your 30s, you're old and washed up, right? So
yeah, in architecture, you have to you can't do your midlife crisis until you're in your 50s. You can't decide, am I successful or not? It's in your 50s when you start to make that analysis. But I would say that for me, I had a bit of design autonomy after about 8 years out of school. But the first 8 years, I had, I might have been a designer at like KMD right out of school. I was a designer for 3 years, but then HOK, I did working drawings. And even though, I wanted to design and not do the working drawings, it's fundamentally was very important that I ended up doing that, because getting that sense of how buildings go together and speaking the language and being able to, I joke around now with the people that are on the technical side that if I know that detail better than you do, that's a problem. But it's because I worked at HOK and did detailing and we used to do this thing where we'd go in and we'd find rat's nests, places where the details weren't quite done well enough or they didn't work. And that was a fun job. It was like a little special operations group, and we'd go in and we just analyze this project and find things that could be done better.
Right.
And you learn a lot that way.
I'll bet. So it's interesting that you're saying that, because I actually have a standing call right now with Patrick McLeamy of HOK.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know Patrick?
I worked at HOK while he was
right,
there.
Right. So he wrote this book, Designing a World-Class Architecture Firm. And he and I got connected, and he's saying some of the same things that you were saying in terms of the mission statement, right? Which is his mission now that he's retired is he's got a couple different things going on. He wrote the book, but it's to kind of get design back into this place of, not just following suit and kind of get the artistry back.
Oh yeah, it's gone missing. It has. And it's unfortunate because there's been a lot of disconnection. And recently there was an article in Bloomberg about a survey that Harris Polls did, and for government buildings, and they showed people pictures of a neoclassical building, a modern building, and only 27% of the time did people pick the modern building. And this went across all race, gender, age, income, very consistent all across the whole thing, is that people are not believing that modern buildings speak to them.
Gotcha.
And so we need to change that. And part of it is how we design, and we need to design more from the heart and make it like we're artists again.
Right. Yeah, I think, that's, as we're talking about young designers, that's kind of a theme, the dream of a young designer is to leave their mark on the world, right? In some fashion, on the sky, the skyline of a city or whatever that looks like. But most people don't grow up and say, I want to design utilitarian buildings that are.
Well, it is tricky because, especially these days, everything it's moving to be much more and more collaborative. So you'll be doing a part of that. And even as, chief artistic officer, I do a part of that. And sometimes I do a little more and sometimes I do a little less. And it's a balancing act with giving people opportunity that are younger. And, the other thing I would say in design, and this is probably really important, and this is something that I've always kept for myself in my heart. And part of it, I think, is because at heart, I'm a painter, is that I'm excited to have the opportunity to design. If it doesn't work out, like they don't pick my design or they do something else, but I still keep getting the opportunity, I'm happy. And every time the client, now that I'm the chief designer, every time the client says, no, I don't like that, it doesn't bother me. And I say, I'm going to do better this next time.
Mm.
And that enthusiasm for like, I'm going to do better the next time. I'm going to, make it more interesting, more incredible. Having that endless energy and not getting disappointed because you had to compromise or because you had to do this, that, or the other thing, you're going to always get another opportunity. You have to keep at it. You have to keep your spirit going. And that's something that people kind of get frustrated with architecture sometimes, because they get a no, and they get another no, and they get another no. So what we do sometimes is I tell the young designers, I want you to design something that you think I would like, and then something that you think we think the client would like. And then once you get that done, you get to do whatever you want.
Right.
And we call that like Scheme X. And sometimes Scheme X is the one that just out of freakish chance the client loves.
Really? That's awesome.
It's usually the purer thought, the one that's got the heart and the passion in it, and people can see that. Now, sometimes it's too crazy. So one of the most important things to learn is you need to balance your passion with a sense of reality in architecture. So if you're a pure or a fine artist, you can afford to do that. But as an architect, everything is done in balance. It's not your money. You're not the person that's going to be using the project. You are using your talents in the service of others. Whether it be the client and the public, or the people that are working there, or the people that are living in the house. And so you have to be sort of a steward, but you have to have vision at the same time. So the current dilemma is in architecture is to do the thing that Patrick was talking about, the thing that we'd like to do. It's designed from the heart. It has to be a combination of vision and collaboration together. So in the old days, the Frank Lloyd Wright days, it was all about vision only, the heroic, at that time, it's the heroic male architect. And now we're transitioning, but we still need to learn to balance, because, the collaborative setting, it can get a little mushy, and it can get a little average, and you got to be able to push it. You got to be able to get the vision in there.
Right.
And people have that in parts, but it's an adventure.
It's a really important point, because whenever we think about collaboration, I mean, it sounds like a really good thing, and oftentimes it is, right? But when you throw, too many cooks in the kitchen, for lack of a better term, I mean, you can.
Well, that was the concept of the Frankenstein monster, right? Like it's all bits and pieces, and then everybody's happy because they got their bit and piece, but nothing works together.
But yeah, exactly.
But the thing is, all kinds of interesting ideas percolate up out of having, more voices on the project. But you still need the vision, right? And so that's, I think, what the profession is going to have to wrestle with is so you went from the heroic era to the collaborative era to what I would call the balanced era. And we're not quite in the balanced era yet, but I think that's the future, is how do you do vision and collaboration at the same time?
Right. Got it. Okay. If we were pivoting away from kind of your favorite part into just like one of the hardest parts, maybe on a day-to-day or of your journey, through architecture, what comes to mind when you say something like that?
Yeah. So in architecture, the hardest part of the journey is almost always the clients. In the sense that, you're navigating compromise. You have a dream, they have a dream, and sometimes you can have some great disappointments there. And then also, in the process of construction, and there are things that happen. So you have to be nimble. So you go from ups and downs, and so those are the things that are the hardest parts of it. Again, you just have to build your own internal resiliency. So you just come back at it, because it's a journey, and it's not going to change. You're not going to suddenly have perfect clients. There is no such thing. Because clients that have endless amounts of money usually have endless amounts of opinions.
That's interesting how that works.
Yeah.
I have a lot of sole proprietor architects, and they design custom homes all over the Bay Area for, you know, the doctors and lawyers of the world, and that can be an amazing job, right? I mean, you get a chance to express your creativity, but also with lots of money comes.
Well, so yes, that's a good point. One of my favorite aspects, and I think in residential this comes to the forefront even more profoundly, is that someone that wants a house designed for them, it's for them. I mean, it's literally for them, right? And so they feel very entitled, which they should be, that it should be about them, right? And not necessarily only about the architect. Now, some clients say, okay, you know, and they might, if they believe in fine art, they would say, okay, I'm going to find the architect and I'm going to pick that style because I know the style that the architect likes, you know, that does. So like if Frank Gehry or somebody like that, they know what they're going to get, and that's what they want. And then they have a certain dynamic relationship with that person. But for most people, it's not that. They don't have that reputation of being this kind of starchitect that the client is coming to you for exactly what you love to design yourself. So what happens is you're in a dynamic with them, and especially in a house, what you need to do, and I think is when we do this well, this is what we really do, is you need to listen really carefully to what their dream is. But if you only parrot it back and do what they ask, just exactly what they ask, which is what a lot of architects do, you've done them a great disservice. Because what you need to do is to be able to give them something that is their dream, that they can feel and see themselves, but it is so much better than what they could do on their own. That's the part, that so much better part is what we should be doing. And that involves that, again, vision and collaboration. So you got to listen, you really has to be about the client, but it doesn't mean that even stylistically, it can't be about you, but you've got to blend it, and they've got to, you know, just ideally they're in tears, right? That's the ideal thing, is the client's like, this is so great, but it's something they couldn't do on their own. Right. Because if you imagine music, I know a lot of people that play music, and some of them write music, not too many, but some write music. But in general, the people they love are over here, you know, it's like, you know, Debussy and Brahms and all these people, they're never going to be that good, but they can dream at a higher level. That's our job, is to get our clients' dream up to a higher level.
That's awesome.
Anyway,
that's really powerful, actually, and I think that's super important. Kind of back to the theme of the mission statement, which is, you know, this collaboration, but also you've got to push people, right? If you ask me what I want and then, you know, I tell you, and then you just create that, it's like, well, did we do our job, right? Did a designer truly do enough?
It gets to a level, right? And it's okay. There's nothing wrong. A client will be happy. So the issue is, how do you push them? But when you push them, it's not pushing them into something they don't want. You need to really do listen. And our job is to make it so much nicer than what they could have done by themselves.
Right.
That delta is our job.
Right. I love it.
The contractor can do this job.
Right.
The designer gets it up to something really sweet. And you have to develop personal relationships. It's very important, because you have to build trust. If the client never trusts you, it's always going to be like this adversarial thing. And some clients are very trusting, and some it's difficult. You have to be, like with a house, you almost have to be a marriage counselor, right? Because you're going to get the husband and wife, or the two married partners doing this, right? Like going in opposite directions.
Yep.
And marriages have broken up over building houses.
Oh, man.
They have. No, I actually worked, sadly. I mean, not sadly, but when I worked for Warren Callister, it was husband and wife, and the designer, you know, was trying to navigate the thing, and it ended up that they got divorced, and the woman married the architect. Not the house. Didn't get the money, the rest of the money.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Because it's a very intimate relationship that
It
you end up
is.
having with people. And anyway.
It is. No, that's a great point. Um, this is an interesting one because you open your own practice.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm hearing a lot is this generation of designer, and maybe broad if we get out of design, isn't striving as much for an ownership role or a leadership role. And so when
That's gonna be
is
very
that
problematic.
okay? Yeah. So I'm
Oh yeah.
hearing
No, we have that huge problem. We talk about this all the time. So
right.
there were originally four of us, in the evolution, and what we realized after a little bit in time is that one of the things that differentiated the four of us was, one, we were hungry for something. Now we wanted different things. Like I wanted design, I wanted art. Some of my other partners wanted to make a lot of money, and some of them just wanted to live and breathe the profession the way they feel technically they wanted to do. But we all were hungry. We wanted this thing, and we all had a lot of initiative. So we would push and pull and make things happen. And the problem is, with a lot of the kids, is they just want to be part of a team, and they just want to be part of a team, and they feel alone and isolated. If I have one of them come work with me, they feel alone and isolated. Like, where's the rest of the team? And they almost don't know how to, like, if I say, just give me 20 ideas, and they're like, well, how do I do that? I mean, it's just like, they want the team, they want the group to come up with 20 ideas, and they'll add to that, but it's in a group setting, right? They feel more comfortable.
Right.
It's a very interesting dynamic. The downside of that is you're going to get less artistry,
Right.
and you're going to get more of a sense of these bigger firms, the corporate firm. And we're in the in-between. We did a book called The Absurdity of Beauty, Rebalancing the Modernist Narrative with the Architectural Review. And I sent it to a friend of mine who used to work at Gensler. And his first response was, "Oh yeah, you hate all these big corporate firms." And I said, actually, we're very much the same as you are. We're just saying we can do a better job. But one of the problems is in a sense, sometimes the bigger firms, they don't give voice to individual people. It's like a group dynamic. You hire a big name corporate firm, of which there are many in San Francisco, actually, and the firm's brand is very generic, and so the question is, and I'm hopeful that these corporate firms can and will morph into being more creative institutions. And that's why, with Patrick McLamey saying somewhat the same thing, like you were saying, that gives me hope that we'll be able to reintroduce that into those firms.
Right.
But it also is going to take people that are young, being hungry to want to design, to want to speak from their heart, and hopefully, push a bit.
Right. That's something. So, when I think about the foundation and kind of what we can affect, and granted, this would take, this is a study that would take years to see if we're right or not. When I'm talking to designers that own their own firms 20, 30, 40 years ago, when they were in school, whether at undergrad or graduate school, they felt as though their professors spoke to them in a way that was like, eventually you will be an owner, right? And part of being a great leader is being a great follower in the beginning, right? You're not a leader right out of the gate necessarily, or at least not at the level of ownership. But it was this expectation. And and what I do with risk management, I mean, we teach a little bit at Cal, and I know you had taught some classes at UC Berkeley, right?
Yeah, 12 years. Yeah.
12 years. And now, when you're in architecture classes and you ask the students to raise their hand, are you looking to be licensed, right? The percentage over the years is dropping in terms of people that actually
you don't need to be
licensure.
licensed to be basically an architect, a designer for your
Right.
entire career, because only person needs to sign the drawings.
Right,
And
right,
you don't get more money, and you
right.
don't get a raise. However, at the very top, it does limit you, because the the top tier of an architecture firm, you want people to be licensed architects, so that you can go to the client and say, but I'm an architect. Because if you're not licensed, you can't really say that you're an architect. You
No,
shouldn't say that you're an architect.
it's not legal in the state of California to say you're an
It's
architect
not
if you're not.
legal.
Yeah, right,
It's not right.
right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
So
you're effectively an architect, but you have to. So weirdly, we've got the title project manager, and then right below project manager is project architect.
mhm.
But if someone's not licensed, they can't use that title.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's an interesting problem that I would love to figure out a really long-term solution to from a training standpoint, in terms of leadership training, right? Because leadership is incredibly important, right? Leadership will alter the path, both good and bad, of a firm. And I'm wondering what we can do to get
Well,
younger.
leadership is an interesting thing, because we work with a lot of Silicon Valley companies. I mean, Google, Facebook, VMware, Netflix. I mean, just all over the gamut. And they have what you'd call like a Silicon Valley collaboration model that we're trying to design space to support. And but the thing I found is that the model they use doesn't work that well for architecture and interior design.
Hmm.
So the thing is, as you're developing leadership courses and a focus, it depends on what you're doing. So what works in Silicon Valley to create software programs and develop concepts for products is very different than what's going to make a building speak to your heart.
Mm.
One way to look at that is that Google is extraordinarily good at telling you quantitatively why something is popular, but it cannot tell you if it's any good, right? It cannot tell you qualitatively whether it's good. There are judgment calls, again, that have to come from the heart artistically. And it's very different. It's the management model is not set up necessarily for an artistic process, because it tends to be more linear, logical, verbal. And architecture and design is a balance between linear, logical, verbal, and nonlinear, intuitive, and visual. And that's a creative process versus a thought process. And so to manage artists, to manage creative people, you have to modify that management skill set, right?
Right.
Because it doesn't quite work as cleanly, in terms of transference, right? So what's fascinating is if you can get it to work, especially for architects,
Right.
and designers, interior
Right.
designers, and landscape architects, and urban
Landscape
designers,
architects. Yeah.
all design.
Right.
So our firm name is Form4 Architecture, and we're tempted to change it because it sounds now so singular, and half the office is interior design. So who knows? We might change.
Yeah.
It.
Interesting. Going through a rebrand.
Well, we are doing a rebrand.
Are you? Okay.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the partners left. One of the original four, and so now we're back to sort of three and a half. We have a one fellow that's on his path to becoming a shareholder, and so we thought we'd take that moment after 20 years of re-looking. So we have now Form4 2.0. That's the one that starts with, in order to return a sense of humanity to architecture, or to design. So again, get rid of just the architecture word, to design. We advocate for blankety blank, blank, blank.
Right.
So, but the important part is that returning a sense of humanity to design. And that's what differentiates us. We want to make those lovable buildings, again, designed from the heart. So
that's great. Okay. The projects question, this is a tough one, because we don't want to ask you like what your favorite project is, because hopefully it's all of them or close to all of them. But is there a project?
Oh no, I wrote down a couple because you
did you?
had it
Okay.
on your list, right?
All right. Perfect.
So so there's two, just to narrow it down. So one's built and one's unbuilt. And I think that for me is very important. And partially this, again, it comes back to being a painter is I generally love the unbuilt projects better than the built ones. Mostly because some of the unbuilt ones were design competitions where you can design freely. You can get your cadence going and really stretch your design muscles. And you can't do that generally with clients on $200 million projects that they're going to be a little conservative about.
Right.
But every once in a while, you get a great one, which is Innovation Curve, which is in Palo Alto near the corner of Hanover and Page Mill. And this is a very lyrical building, but it's also very green. It's LEED Platinum. It's very close to being net zero building. And I think it's playful, it's lyrical, it's very thoughtful, it's very dynamic, and it's very unusual for Silicon Valley.
Right.
So that's on the built side. That would be my favorite one. And then there on the unbuilt side is a design competition that's called Sanguine Lily. And so in sort of the tradition of James Abbott Neil Whistler, who painted Whistler's mother, we have lyrical names for many of our projects. So Sanguine Lily is a project that was designed in the shape of a lily flower, and it's a chapel in the Glasnevin Cemetery in Dublin, and it's there to honor the 232 souls that were killed in the Easter Rising in Dublin in 1916. Wow. So the chapel is right next to the mass grave that the English buried all these folks in.
Wow.
And so it has many, so when I look at things, there's like the emotional meaning of a project. And so for us, it's not that buildings need to be beautiful per se, but they need to have strong emotional meaning. So the lily is very beautiful, but at the same time, it's sad in a way, right? Because it's commemorating a big tragedy. I mean, a horrible tragedy, right? But it also was a bit of the future. I mean, still a difficult future in Ireland.
Right.
But anyway, it's both beautiful, it's meaningful, it's got a lot of symbolism in it that's very powerful. Inside of the chapel, if you imagine, it's got glass walls on two sides, and there's sort of like this lily flower, very thin concrete kind of tensile suspended roof. And at night, what you see are these 232 glass spheres that are lit up. And at night, they represent the souls ascending to heaven.
Wow.
So, you can't do poetry.
Yes, you can do poetry. That's awesome.
So that's why I like that one, as the ones. We've got some other fun ones, one's called Crashing Waves and Luminous Moongate and Lyrical Seashore, Sea Song. There's a whole bunch of different projects that are I'm quite fond of, but I think Sanguine Lily probably is the one that pulls it all together the best.
Right. That's awesome. That's really cool. Okay, just a couple more questions for you here and we'll let you go. Are there any leaders in architecture, in design, that you admire or have inspired you in some manner?
Oh, yeah, I have a lot. Again, it's hard to narrow it down. It isn't like there's just this one.
Right.
So, I kind of thought about it a little bit, and I have three, because you asked for three. Or you said some leaders, but so Renzo Piano, Santiago Calatrava, and Warren Callister. So Warren Callister, small little firm in Tiburon, and the thing that I think exemplifies Warren Callister was that he was 75 years old before he got an architectural license. And the reason was he was very intentional about this. And actually, he didn't get it voluntarily. His daughter-in-law, I think, decided to do this as a birthday gift. And she actually went and lobbied George Deukmejian, who was governor at the time, and said, Warren deserves an architectural license. He'll never apply for it on his own, but he's been doing architecture for 40 years. He's done all these amazing houses and churches and all of these wonderful buildings. And can we make this happen? And they actually made this happen. And one day they came over and they said, Dad, we're having this big party for your 75th birthday, and you're now a licensed architect. Now, I don't know what he said about that, because the reason he said, architects are artists, and you should never license artists.
Interesting.
And when I went to work for him, that's the way he did his process. That's the way now there was always somebody that was a partner in the office that was licensed, so they could sign drawings, right? So they got around the technicality, but I loved his passion for the idea of art and architecture. And he took it so far as to refuse to get licensed.
Right.
Which I've never heard anybody do that.
Right.
So that was charming. And he was very serious. He wasn't an artist as in, it's just going to do kind of crazy things, though there's nothing wrong with that. But he was very grounded.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's Warren Callister. And then Calatrava, just this beautiful lyrical structuralism that's biomorphic. It's kind of based on nature. He gets in trouble all the time for for these very expensive buildings.
Right.
There is the Calatrava version of the Bilbao effect, which he designed a museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and somebody else had designed the museum for the museum. I don't know who it was, but they were having trouble raising like $10 million. This was a long time ago, $10 million to build this thing. And they were almost going to give up. And then somebody said, well, let's hire a famous architect and see what happens. And the thing he designed was so beautiful, because in Wisconsin, I'm from the Midwest, Wisconsin, people, kind of notice if somebody's famous, but at the same time, we're like, you got to prove it. It doesn't matter if he's famous, bring it. And so he designed this beautiful thing, right? This sort of bird-like structure that actually opens up when the weather's good and it closes down when it's windy, kind of a thing. And it's amazing. And they raised $50 million like that, because people saw the dream, right? And the other group was just being too conservative, to be too safe. Now, sometimes you have to do that. That's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes you need the dream, right? So when you get your opportunity to dream, you got to run with it.
Right.
But anyway, Calatrava, also a painter, a poet, sort of that whole package.
Right.
And then Renzo Piano is just so thoughtful and sweet and kind. And, there is this whole thing about the arrogance of an architect, and we have earned that by being fussy. And I actually worked on a project once as the client for a private club in the Presidio. And I learned the arrogance of the designer, because I had to deal with the other architects, right? Who the club had hired. And it was amazing. And they're nice people, but oh my God, they were so difficult. But then I knew all their tricks. And so we got big fights all the time about things. Anyway, but so it's nice to have somebody so famous who's so thoughtful and kind.
Right.
And I think for me, the important concept in regards to that issue of arrogance is for people to understand the difference between self-indulgence and self-expression. And self-expression means you can listen, but there's a bit of yourself in what you're doing, right? That you're looking deep into yourself, and you're looking into other folks, and you can do this. But self-indulgence means that you could care the heck less about everybody else, and you're just going to do whatever you're going to want to do. And sometimes that's okay too. But for me, the idea of being self-expressive and feeling the validity of that doesn't mean I'm self-indulgent, right? It doesn't mean that I don't care about anybody and I'm not going to listen.
Right. It's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Oh, love it. All right.
Because we tend to exclude self-expression from architecture. We do, actually. It's like, make it generic, make it so no one will hate it. But when you make something so banal that no one will hate it, no one loves it either, right? And I'd
Right.
rather do something that 95% of the people absolutely love and 5% absolutely hate, than no one hates it, because
But
then
nobody
no one
loves it.
loves it. It's
Right.
just zeros all
Right.
across the board.
All right, last question for you. What is the best piece of advice that you could give to an up and coming design professional? And maybe if you can go kind of two directions with it, maybe as, you know, advice that you wish somebody had given you or something along those lines. And then also as an owner of a firm, as you're, you know, hiring kind of the younger generation, if you have any thoughts there.
Well, there's a wide range of things that happen in architecture. And when I was teaching, and I would ask the students, you know, whether people kind of told them what would happen, because everybody wants to be a designer, tends to want to be a designer when they're in school, but only 10% of what architects do is design. I mean, really the creative part of design that everybody loves. And so it's tough, and the other 90% are doing other things. And so you have to be balanced and embrace the whole process. And even so when I say that as chief artistic officer, I don't design all day long. Probably 25% of my day is design, and the other 75% is doing all the other things. So everybody gets a chance, you know, to do things, but it's not going to be that like heroic, I'm going to be the heroic architect. But anyway, that's not the advice yet. The advice is, because I wrote a little thing down, is one is know your true self and know what your dreams are. And don't give up on those dreams, but at the same time, know what your talents are, and both where you can go, but what your limitations are. Because not everybody is going to be good at every aspect of architecture. And some people are better at certain things than other things. But you need to, and it takes a while to learn that. I mean, you don't know that when you get out of school generally. I mean, occasionally people do. But most of the time you have to go on a journey. And so you don't know where you're going to end up in architecture, you know,
Right.
within the profession of architecture and design. And then probably the most important thing for me is to understand balance, and that what you're doing is always a balanced equation. There's always trade-offs. There's always, you get this and you give this up. And so sometimes people are too anxious, and this goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. They're too anxious. They don't have enough patience. Mm-hmm. And so for me, you know, I remember there was a fellow when I was working at KMD for the second time who just had this idea, and he was going to sell this idea no matter what. And he was willing to risk, you know, his career at the office to sell this idea. And then I was saying, well, I've got like 5 ideas I like, and I haven't committed to one. He goes, well, you have to commit to one. I mean, it was just like, there's no artistic integrity if you don't do that. And I said, you know, I usually like to have 5 things, and let's let other people choose, you know, which of those 5, as long as they're all good. And so there was this dynamic between, no, you've got to have one idea and it's all or nothing, or open it up. And for me, it's more balanced to do that. He thought it was horrible amount of compromise, but that's how I got to where I am, is the ability to know when to push and pull, and to try to have 5 great ideas in case the one thing that you think is the great idea is total failure.
Right.
And then you're always disappointed, right?
Right.
So,
right.
But anyway, balance and patience.
Balance and patience. I love it.
Wait, balance, patience, and passion. Right.
Passion. Passion is an important
balance,
one too.
And passion.
Oh, that was excellent. John, thank you so much for your time.
Really
appreciate it.